All right, testing one, two. Looks like we're back for another round of. I guess we're calling it better with context, but in reality, it's just me talking about specific topics or things that I've uncovered or am kind of seeing in my world. Today I really wanted to kind of talk about what happens when you call in an outside resource to come and review what's not working for your marketing. It's a really I guess an interesting concept. I know it's something that I recently wrote about, but realized I didn't get a chance to speak about it, or I guess record about it. So that's what we're doing today. So to kind of jump right in, normally, when a company brings somebody in to fix their marketing, most of the time it's actually figuring out what's broken and what's not. Shocker, most times when you come into an organization, like their marketing isn't a complete mess. They have things that are working. They have initiatives that have shown promise, or in some cases have delivered on results, but they're struggling a lot of times with trying to figure out how to link the either strategic, approach or the strategic plan that they have to what they're executing at a tactical level, and vice versa. Sometimes, what you'll find in companies of all sizes is you have this talented team of marketing professionals across the board, but they're unclear in terms of what their remit is, or what their what their goals are as it relates to the strategic support of their organization. And so they could be winning, and a lot of times they are. Whether it's running digital campaigns or producing more content. Depending on how they're being measured, or what they're measuring, if it's a pure output perspective, then yeah, they're probably measuring pretty well because, they're talented and they can figure that stuff out. But what's interesting is, and should come as no shock, is, just because you do more doesn't necessarily mean, like, if you ship more, doesn't mean that you're going to see, the same level of results, or that the results that you do see are making the most, impact, that they've been optimized and for efficiency and effectiveness. And so, like, one of the things that I've seen in kind of running through this is, like, I've seen teams where they have a full content calendar and, active paid campaigns, but really there's no clarity in terms of what their funnel looked like. And in that case, what we came in to do is essentially just kind of pause and reorient everything around their buyer's journey. It's not just, what they felt like posting. It turned into, what are we doing? What's the purpose behind this? And kind of instilling or ingraining this idea of, healthy, I don't want to say healthy skepticism, but healthy questioning as it related to, new opportunities or new projects. Like, the example that I'd give you is, if I'm a design professional and I've got 100 different people that are coming to me and saying, "Hey, it'd be great if I got a brochure. It'd be great if I had a deck, or it'd be great, if you could do this or you could do that." I think a lot of times as marketing professionals, we find ourselves in this position. And when you kind of look at it, you realize that we've missed a couple stops along the way. This is probably train stop number 3. In reality, we need to go back to train stop number 1. That is answering or asking the question of our stakeholders, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Not what is it that you think you need. And to give a little bit more color to that, it's asking the question from a discovery perspective and trying to figure out, okay, so if I can understand why this salesperson is telling me that I need to give them a brochure, I might be able to uncover that it turns out that brochures maybe not the best vehicle for what they're trying to accomplish. If they're going into an online meeting with a new prospect, a brochure is probably not going to fit. But if I understand that you're trying to convey value, or you're trying to deliver information in a way that's digestible and in a way that, will provide value to that individual, then yeah, I can work with that. And then we can figure out what's the most optimized way to package that in a way that positions our salesperson as the expert, or at least kind of that Sherpa on their sales or their buyer's journey. And at the same time, making sure that there's, actual value that's being conveyed to the opportunity or, the prospect. So like I mentioned, you kind of come in and you start to, kind of column things out and you say, here's what's working, here's what's not, here's, essentially what's broken. But I'll tell you, what's usually not broken is the people. And I kind of talked about that before, but, oftentimes what you'll find is the internal team is actually super talented and, but they're also overwhelmed or they're misaligned or they're working in silos. I mean, any of those things, and most of the time it's kind of a combination of all three, can lead to more serious concerns down the road, including things like burnout, but also, as it relates to, the day-to-day deliverables. If you've got a design team that's not really talking to a content team, or a content team that has no idea what's actually being run from like a campaigns perspective, then you have all of this just kind of noise. And while each of those teams respectively is shipping and is, producing what they're professionally supposed to produce, it kind of sounds like I refer to it as kind of the orchestral warm-up, where everybody's kind of playing their instrument at about the same level, but, dissonant chords and just not collectively, moving towards or marching towards a shared goal. And, the other thing I'd say is a lot of times it's not, the problem is not in the lack of effort. It's truly just around like the lack of shared priorities or frameworks, which again gets back to, are you dealing with, a tactically heavy, problem where you're producing a ton, but you don't necessarily know why you're producing that? Or are you strategically heavy where, hey, we've got these aspirational ideas and we have a firm grasp in terms of what we want to go do, but we can't seem to build the momentum. We can't get out of the gate when it comes to, tactically executing. And, in the second case, a lot of times it's about setting realistic expectations. Like I think part of, strategic planning, in my experience is kind of defaulted to here's what we want to do this year. But a lot of times if you go back, and I'm raising my hand, although you can't see it, I'm just as guilty of kind of throwing in super aspirational, goals within, a larger strategic plan on purpose. And I do that not because I necessarily expect that we're going to go hit those things, but what I expect is if we can shoot for something that is almost unattainable and get close to that, then I know that the resounding, results of those efforts are actually going to drive meaningful change, or actually going to drive us towards maybe being able to actually attain that in year 2 or 3. But I say all that because, if you took a strategic plan and essentially just converted it completely into tactics, I think a lot of times what teams end up finding is, we want to do all of this stuff and we want to be the best at it and we want to succeed at all of this, but there's so much. And, taking a more realistic breath and pause on, where to set your priorities within your strategy, in my opinion, is way more profitable and way more valuable than just trying to checklist mentality your strategy and just go, yep, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. Even in the case where you might be able to check all those boxes, the very next question is going to be, well, how well did you do it? Did we optimize our processes? Did we optimize our delivery? And did it make an impact for the organization? At the end of the day, like I tell my clients this all the time, like, the best case strategic plan in marketing doesn't mean anything if it's not directly tied and aligned to where your organization is trying to go. And vice versa. If your organization is struggling with direction, there's no realistic expectation that a sound marketing strategy is going to help move anything. You got to start at the top and kind of trickle down to include, specific areas like marketing or sales or, you name it. And then, kind of moving along, I think the other piece of this is reporting, right? So, we kind of talked about, the plan. You can talk about the execution, but how are you actually reporting on the performance of this? A lot of times the reporting is technically there, but your insights may not be. And the example I'll give is like most companies today have some form of dashboard. I grew up and kind of came up the HubSpot tree, and so very familiar with that platform. And it's very clear. It can do a lot of stuff. It can spit out a lot of different reports and build dashboards for you. But I would argue that sometimes, actually most of the time, those dashboards are filled with reports of things that are easy to count, and not necessarily overly insightful. And like I said, most of these companies kind of have these dashboards, and sometimes it's death by dashboard. But even within those dashboards, few really have meaningful narratives behind those numbers. And it leads to very awkward conversations. And when I think about, from a marketing professional seat, it chains you to this position of always being on the defensive and essentially having to, defend the performance metrics that your efforts have generated on whatever it is, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually. And when I think about it from my personal experience, I've spent a lot of time in the brand building and the overall positioning and narrative space, and we do that through a bunch of different channels and vehicles. But the one that always jumps out to me is the way that we've structured our webinar series. And, when I'm constantly asked, well, how many leads did we generate from the webinar? It's a fascinating question because, at face value, you go, oh, well, we could take a look at how many people registered or how many people attended based on the registration. But in reality, again, we go back to the train analogy, like we're probably 3 stops into this journey, and we probably should go back and ask ourselves, what is the purpose of this webinar series or this ebook or, insert potential deliverable or asset here. In the case of webinars, at least for, the way that I've structured it, they're not really our main lead gen source. In fact, they are more, and were originally built to, help accelerate what we were doing on the thought leadership side and really the brand build side of the house. And the fact that, they've continued to perform well and have continued to draw more attention and more eyes is awesome. That means that we're definitely hitting our mark when it comes to progressing our brand and our awareness and kind of our footprint. But at the same time, it's not a business development goal. And so if you're consistently measuring everything either through the same exact, looking glass, or if you haven't stopped to ask yourself questions like, what is the purpose behind these particular, processes or projects, then you're going to end up in this really weird spot where, again, you've got a million dashboards that can tell you all of these different countable metrics, but in reality, like, there's no meaningful narrative behind those numbers. When teams go from, we had 400 clicks to, here's what that tells us about messaging or our audience, or, what the audience member's intent is. In my opinion, having maybe 4 or 5 measurable KPIs that can really help drive that narrative are incredibly valuable. And in some cases, I'd make the argument they're more valuable than having a dashboard full of, reports that just kind of count things. And again, this kind of leads into, I think this will be my final point, but, fixing marketing really isn't always about doing more. It's actually more about doing the right thing with the right amount of focus. And, I'm sure we've all kind of felt this, but a ton of companies just kind of default to this idea that, we need to just publish more, or we gotta increase the budget to spend more on our ads, or we've got to grow the marketing department because we need to again ship more stuff. But the real unlock is actually counterintuitive to that thought, and it's more often around subtraction. Where you can pause your ineffective tactics, or you can take a very, very hard line pass through at what's working well in terms of where you're throwing your dollars, and try and figure out, is there a way that we can optimize this versus like scale definitely plays into this, but I would argue that if you don't have an optimization plan in place first, it doesn't matter how much you scale it, you're still going to end up with the same problem. It just be, in some cases, it'll be a lot bigger. Other areas that you could focus on is making sure that your roles are super clear, and across the team. And, maybe it's focusing on 1 to 2 key wins versus, again, that checklist mentality of trying to do it all at once and kind of run at full speed. But, ultimately, when I get in and start looking under the hood, those things are most of what I find. And the good news is like, those are all very fixable, and those are all, and when I say fixable, they're all optimizable, I guess. It's an opportunity for organizations to take a pause, take a beat, and try and figure out, what do you do best? It's not that much different from, like when I was playing football. There were some times where we would field the team based on, what we knew, or based on what had worked in the past. But there were plenty of times where we had a specific game plan going into that helped us play to our strengths. And that might mean that you had more offensive line on the field when you were on offense, or, maybe you're going to a nickel package more frequently on defense, depending on, what your opponent was showing you. It's no different in business. It's no different in marketing, right? Like, if you can see the inputs that are coming from your audience or coming from the market, there's absolutely no reason why you should ignore those things, even if they're counterintuitive to either how you're structured or what you're currently running. Because ultimately, like, it doesn't matter what you do in the market, if that makes sense. Like, what should matter is what your audience is telling you and what the market is telling you, and can you pivot, and can you be nimble enough to capitalize on those opportunities. And in doing so, like, again, you need a straightforward strategy that kind of allows for that flexibility and allows for you to be nimble, without necessarily just being overburdened by tactical execution. At the risk of sounding cliche, keep it simple. And in doing it that way, I think you're going to unlock and uncover a lot of insights that ultimately can help you tell that story better and get you out of the chair of defensive marketer. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about this week. And again, thank you to our 7 listeners, wherever you may be. Hopefully, these are helpful to you guys. I'm going to keep trying to do these. And if you have ideas or you have things that you'd like me to talk about, by all means, let me know. I'm happy to cover whatever you'd like.